Well, I love the vision, and one of the reasons why I love it is that it just values people's time at a more
Right.
appropriate rate. One of the reasons why, like, I'm pro universal basic income relative to other measures is that it values some of the time that right now doesn't get considered as employment. And
Right.
like, for example, if my wife is at home with our boys, then like
Right.
that doesn't count. But
Zero in GDP calculation.
yeah, zero in GDP.
Zero.
But the same principle applies where if you are elevating people's wages, you're just valuing people's time more. Like, one of the reasons why
100%.
I'm pro UBI is like you should just value people's time, like, intrinsically, and
Right.
so. But the principle is very similar. It's one reason why when you talk about elevating these things, like, I just imagine more human dignity, which there is immediately. So you surprise yourself and win. And then you're like, oh my gosh, like, we're getting this done in Seattle, and then and that happens 90 days
That's
later.
right. And
then what happens next?
And SEIU drove it super hard and super successfully around the country.
Fight for 15. Yeah,
that's right. Mary Kay Henry did an extraordinary job in leadership there. CJ Grimes, who ran the National Fight for 15, was amazing, and a bunch of other people who I could mention. But then the question, to your point, is, Andrew, what's next, right? Because the minimum wage is it's a start, but there's 1,000 things that you can do. And I will tell you, in my opinion, what the second most important thing is that we have been fighting since 2014, I think, is the overtime threshold. Speaking of time. So the overtime threshold is the threshold below which if you work for more than 40 hours a week, they have to pay you time and a half. And in the day, like when we used to have a thriving middle class 40 years ago, that threshold covered not just 100% of hourly workers, but it also covered 62% of salaried workers, which means that effectively it covered almost everybody except the big bosses. Okay? And what happened over 45 years of neoliberalism is people like me turned hourly workers into salaried workers and pitched them fake titles like assistant manager or director of
you're on your way
filing. Yes. And you get a business card. And then that standard fell and it just got updated. But as of last year, if you earned $23,600 a year or less, you got overtime. But that means if you earn $23,700 federally, and I call you assistant manager, I can make you work 70 hours a week and not pay you one more dollar than I was.
Keynes projected that we'd have like a 15-hour work week by now because we're so productive. And then he got the productivity number right, but our work week has just gotten longer and longer because of some of the things you're describing. Because someone's like, oh, you're there, and like work just kind of expands.
Yes, it does. It does. And because people like me employing other people had this enormous incentive to turn 3 40-hour-a-week jobs into 2 60-hour-a-week jobs, right? As if I don't have any limit on how hard I can press people to work, then what I want to do is get 2 people to work as much as 3 used to and pocket the difference, right? Imagine how profitable that is. Imagine how profitable that is. To have 1,000 people working 40 hours a week, and then presto magico, now you have 650 people working 60 hours a week for the same price.
I remember one of the things that expanded the work week, and this is going to date me a little bit, but whatever, was BlackBerries. Like, as soon as you had a BlackBerry, then people could get you anytime, and then obviously that morphed into smartphones, and people can get people anytime, and now the work week goes on forever.
but one of the reasons the work week goes on forever is that all those people with BlackBerries were not protected by this labor standard, right? Because in the day, you couldn't get people to work at home. They'd be like, well, now you have to pay me overtime.
So is the plan to have the overtime threshold applied to salaried workers as well as wage workers?
Well, it is presently applied to salaried workers at $32,000 a year, which effectively is almost no salaried workers. But again, using this theory of local first change, in Washington state last year, we pushed through the nation's highest overtime threshold. I believe it is.
Tell us more. Tell us more.
And at full implementation, it will be at about $83,000. So what we are presently doing is putting pressure on the Department of Labor and the Biden administration to either enact a law or change the labor standard so that if you earn $83,000 a year or less, you are automatically entitled to overtime, pay it time and a half if you work more than 40 hours a week.
This would be transformative, and I will say it would be a job creator in many, many contexts, because someone would look up and say, wait a minute, I'm going to have to pay my workers overtime because right now they're working 55 hours a week, and that's time and a half. So how about I go employ like another set of people to try and keep everyone at 40?
That's right. And so one of the secrets to understanding why wages have not risen for a really long time is that if you can 40 million times across the economy turn 3 jobs into 2, well, you've taken 15 million jobs out of the economy, plus or minus, or 12 million jobs, or whatever it is, right? And this is why structural unemployment is so high, is because companies can get workers to work more hours without being forced to hire more people. And so everybody's just on this treadmill. And we're talking to the folks who work for Marty Walsh in the Labor Department, but we're also circulating the idea of actually passing this legislatively. Between you and me, if I was Biden, I would want to try to pass this legislatively because just politically and economically, there is no policy that is available to Democrats that more directly benefits middle-class people. Do you know what I mean? Like the minimum wage is fantastic.
This would be a big deal for a lot of people.
But it would be a huge transformative deal for tens of millions of Americans, many of whom voted for Donald Trump in the last election, right?
Okay, Nick. So so what is the catchy name for this measure?
Well, it's overtime. And I guess what you're saying to me is that's a really crappy, not very catchy name.
Well, so I know. I mean, I am suggesting that, Nick,
which I'm admitting.
Because right now I'm like, let's champion overtime before people are like, what does that mean?
What is that?
Though I understand how incredibly transformative it would be positively. Wait, I've got it. All right. Fight for 40.
Fight for 40. That's a good, you know what? That's pretty goddamn good.
That's not bad, right? Because Fight for 15 was very, very successful and alliterative. And like you hear it. So if you say Fight for 40.
A Star is Born. I think it's pretty good.
It's pretty good, right? Because you hear it and you're like Fight for 40. You're like $40 an hour. It's like, no, 40 hours a week. And then you're like, oh shit, 40 hours a week. Then it's like, and if you're working for more than that, then you should get paid overtime. And everyone will be like, hell yeah, fight for 40, Nick.
I think that is absolutely terrific. More to come. On all the little buttons, we're going to have a little asterisk and say, bye, Andrew Yang.
No. No credit necessary. Just freaking, as long as it happens, I'll be very, very glad.
And one of the most encouraging things going is the Biden administration's, and I think the Democratic Party's acknowledgement generally that this is a time for bold action.
Yeah, that's been what my conversations with them have also indicated.
Like they need to deliver the goods to people.
They have a window of time where the government has to demonstrate that it can actually improve things.
Shit.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and so the time is ripe for, I think, a much more constructive dialogue about this particular thing.
Let the fight for 40 commence. If that becomes a thing, I'm going to be so proud, Nick. I'm not going to lie.
It's a really good idea. I'm being serious. As soon as I hang up, I'm going to run that by some people. I think it's incredibly clever.